I'm Ben Reiman, and this is Behaviour Speak. One of my missions is to interview a behavior analyst in every country in the world.
Yeah. How close are we to that?
Oh, well, I think I need to look up how many countries in the world there are.
Okay.
But I know that I think so far I've covered close to 50 countries. I think I've got about 25 or 30 scheduled for this year. I think one of the greatest rewards from doing this, certainly I love all the feedback. I love being able to uplift voices that may not have a space somewhere else. But something that I didn't sort of expect, and you alluded to it a bit earlier when we were sort of talking about people from one country listening about efforts in another country, is that even with this day of internet and connection and social media and so many opportunities to connect with people all over the world, I've had so many folks tell me they found each other via this podcast.
Yeah.
They found someone like them that they didn't know existed. And that's been incredibly humbling and an incredible honor to sort of create connections. Welcome back to Behaviour Speak, everybody. Today's episode is a special one because for the first time in a while, I'm not in the host seat. I'm in the guest seat. And honestly, I couldn't think of a better person to take over the mic than Dr. Asmahan Saleh Khalil. Asmahan joined me for episode 200, and that conversation was such a highlight. Thoughtful, grounded, and deeply aligned with the kind of conversations I've always hoped this podcast could hold. So when she said she had questions for me, I was equal parts excited, and I'll admit, a little nervous. And now I know exactly how all of my guests have felt over the last 5 years. This conversation is reflective. It's personal. It's about the journey of Behaviour Speak, from a small idea with no real direction to something that's connected voices across nearly 50 countries. We talk about what I've learned, what surprised me, what I got wrong, and what I'm still trying to figure out. We also get into some of the ideas that have really shaped my thinking: cultural humility, anti-racism, motivational interviewing, and the constructional approach, and what I wish I had learned much earlier in my career. And before we jump in, I want to take a moment to say thank you to Asmahan. Thank you for your generosity, your curiosity, and for creating such a thoughtful, safe space for this conversation. It really meant a lot to be on the other side of the mic with you. Also, this episode is being released at a really special time. April is Middle East North Africa Heritage Month, and throughout the entire month, we'll be offering free CEUs for a series of Behaviour Speak episodes featuring incredible guests from across the MENA region, including voices from Palestine, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, and Lebanon, including Asmahan herself. And I'm also really excited to share that we're releasing a brand new episode in April with Rima Jubran from Jordan. So stay tuned for that. And make sure to take advantage of those free learning opportunities throughout the month. This episode is presented by our founding academic partner, the Doctor of Education in the field of Applied Behavior Analysis program at Western University's Faculty of Education. All right, let's get into it. Here is Dr. Asmahan Saleh Khalil interviewing me.
Okay. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hi, Asmahan, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm good, and it's nice to see you. It's nice to speak to you again.
Yes, I'm nervous and excited to speak with you as well.
Now you know how it feels like for everyone on the other side, right? Because today I think the tables have turned, and I think when I met with you when we did the Behaviour Speak episode together, and you were telling me about all the work that you've been doing, this question popped into my head, like, well, you've met with all of these people from all of these countries, and it was still going on. And the first thought that I had was, well, I have so many questions to ask you about all of these professionals that you've interviewed and all of these perspectives that you've taken. So here we are. I think maybe around a year later, more than a year later than our interview. We're at the 5-year anniversary of Behaviour Speak.
Yeah, that's hard to believe.
So 5 years. I think you're saying it's more than 300 guests. Am I?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It's been a lot of folks. Yeah. So
300 guests from different countries, from different nationalities, from different cultures. So I can't wait to dive deep into everything you've taken from everyone, and so we can see your perspective.
Yeah, amazing. All right,
I'm glad you agreed to this. Yeah. I want to kind of take you back to the beginning when you first started Behaviour Speak. Was that the intention to kind of get this multicultural perspective, or did you kind of fall into it as you went along and you got to know different professions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I didn't really know what the intention was when I first started. The reason for starting the podcast was very, uh, it really had no mission or inspiration behind it whatsoever. I'm I think one of the reasons I've been able to do this for so long, and I should do a shout out to CBI Consultants, which is my employer, because I'm able to. I do this on work time. It was my boss's, the company owner's, Paul Millet's idea to sort of start this thing. He thought, it might be maybe a good marketing tool for us, or some way of, kind of getting our name out there. And But after that, he said, kind of, do whatever you want with it. And I had it was interesting because I had some thoughts about. I listened to a few of ABA podcasts. There were a couple. I think there's a couple big ones out there. Behavioral Observations, ABA and Sidetrack are two really big ones. They just actually celebrated their 10-year anniversary this year. So, it was inspiring listening to a lot of these voices. And there was a few folks that were sort of up and coming that had started podcasts. And I thought, I wonder if that's something I could do, because I've always thought I've had opinions on things and thoughts about things that uh, I hadn't been able to get out to properly. And also, a lot of folks know from listening, I live in a very kind of remote area, and I don't have a lot of opportunity for networking and conferencing and connecting with others. And I thought this might be a really good way of doing that. So, but I kind of racked my brain about sort of how can I do something different. I
Okay.
wanted to do something different.
Well,
Again,
that it definitely is. That's definitely.
yeah, thank you. I think I achieved that for sure. Uh, and I thought maybe different might be starting with maybe not interviewing Americans, because I think the bulk of our field is American, and so and there's some incredible, certainly American practitioners. But I thought that maybe that could be a niche area,
Yeah.
to sort of start there. And not being American myself, I'm in Canada, as many folks know. I thought, well, maybe I can just start by interviewing folks I know locally, and it might be a little more comfortable. I already had some relationships with folks, and I could kind of start there. That's kind of where it started. And that first episode, although I think it really became the theme of the whole podcast, by no means was the intention at the time. It was just more a coincidence that I had this connection with Danielle Reed at the time, and we had been talking for quite a bit, and it just sort of happened she'd be the first episode. But uh, yeah, it really morphed a lot over time.
Okay. Okay. Well, it morphed into, I think, something very unique, right? I think the podcast has a very unique voice. It brings a very important conversations that I feel a lot of behavioral analysts, behavioral specialists are struggling to find, right? This multicultural perspective, this awareness, this kind of humility about different approaches to this field. So I'm glad that it took the trajectory that it did. Um, so I was wondering, with all of these different backgrounds and cultures and close to 300 guests that you've spoken to, what was the one thing that surprised you the most about how ABA specifically, or just behavior generally, is approached? Has there been anything that stood out, or a
Yeah,
moment that took you by surprise?
there's been a lot, I think. I might kind of go back a bit and talk a little bit more about kind of how it morphed into what it morphed into, because I
Yes.
think that sort of was guided. I think there were a lot of surprises that kind of guided the turn. Because initially my goal was, I'm going to interview Canadians. I'm going to reach out to Canadians, but I also wanted to interview folks that were doing things that were, unique. And I found a few folks
Yeah.
locally that were doing some interesting things early on. I had my BCBA supervisor on, which was an interesting experience, in kind of episode 18 there, and spoke to a few Canadians, but really ran out quite quickly, and thought, what, how can I sort of keep my my sort of initial goal of staying out of the U.S. Going, and the only way I could do that was to start looking overseas.
Okay.
And so I started with the UK because I had some connections over in the UK already, and interviewed a few folks over there. But again, kind of quickly ran out of. I kind of ran through all of my contacts by sort of, episode 20 or so, or 25, and now I had to start sort of looking for people I didn't know,
Okay.
and that's when I started exploring other countries.
Okay.
And I think that was sort of the first surprise, was that sort of beyond North America and the UK. Obviously, I learned more in the last 5 years, but at that time, I thought, I can't find any more behavior analysts. I don't know where they are. It was
It
getting
gets
harder to sort of
It gets
harder to
harder.
look for them, and so I think that was surprise number one, that there were a lot of these, and the language to use. I don't even know how to describe these countries anymore. I used to have so many, inappropriate terms, I think,
Yeah.
to label these countries, but countries that I thought were, relatively wealthy and, and doing well, had very little to none of sort of ABA, or even, even access to autism diagnoses. That was my first surprise, that some of the sort of the access and privilege that I think we have over here, was a real wake up call. And then the other big surprise, I think, for me was, and this was right around when I was kind of, and I think this was a big thing that kind of really led to the path the podcast took, was, and I've told this story a few times to guests before we start recording, but I haven't really told it on the air. And it was really kind of how this podcast has really been almost like a memoir journey of sorts for me.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Personally or professionally, or both?
Both, absolutely both. So I feel like, so in 2019, just the idea for the podcast came up in early 2020, like January or February 2020, I think, was when we first had that conversation, just before the pandemic was, kind of hit, and the world changed. Just prior to that, in December 2019, a lot of things kind of came to a T for my life personally, in that I got an ADHD diagnosis. So late in life. So that was 2019. I was 45 years old, and some medication, and I had not realized sort of how deeply the symptoms of ADHD had affected me over the years, until I started this medication in 2019, and really felt like by mid-January 2020, right around when this kind of idea came about, that I was sort of reborn.
Wow. Can I ask what the trigger was for you to pursue a diagnosis?
Yeah.
At that age, I would assume there would be a lot of masking, a lot of differential diagnoses probably, but
Yeah,
can I
no, it's a
ask
good,
that?
yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I, and looking back, I don't know how, this was missed. As a child, I spent a little time in special education. I have some memories of engaging with a speech pathologist. I think that was,
Efforts being put. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was more for a lisp, really. It wasn't really for sort of a behavioral kind of issue.
Well, okay.
I remember some oral exercises that I was doing
That stuck with you.
that stuck with me, and as I started to learn more about the speech pathology profession, I was like, oh,
Okay.
that's who those folks were. I had I mean, I grew up in a in a a very privileged context. Two-parent family. Both employed. Middle class. Grew up in white picket fence neighborhood. Lots of access to sort of all sorts of things. So in that way, I certainly wasn't deprived, but I had a difficult childhood just in terms of social interactions and whatnot, a lot of bullying and different things like that. And in hindsight, I think the ADHD probably helped me in some ways because I don't really recall most of it. I had very little focus. School was difficult for me on some level, and yeah, it was. I'm very happy to be an adult, and kind of reflecting back, and certainly into my 20s and even early 30s, I struggled with in a lot of different areas that I really couldn't explain. I tried therapy. I'd been in therapy for 20 years for different things. So I was really trying to try to figure out what was going on, and I had a lot of I still had a lot of memory issues. I struggled with OCD, really kind of compulsive thinking, anxiety, hints of depression, a whole kind of gamut of things. I was really stuck in my head, and this was long before I learned about acceptance and commitment therapy and some of those tools. But I things just weren't connecting and weren't working, and I was really struggling. My mind, I couldn't hold a conversation. I wouldn't be able to hold this conversation.
Okay.
I would be so lost asking you what was the question, those sorts of things. In any case, fast forward to January 2019, and my wife, God bless her, comes up to me and says, Ben, I don't want you to get upset. I'm not
Always
trying
a
to.
sensitive conversation.
Yep. I'm not trying to be mean. Yep. I'm not trying
There's no right
to
way to say it.
insult you. And I said, okay, what's going on? Well, I think there might be something wrong with your brain.
Okay.
Was the
Okay,
exact
that's one
phrase. And
way.
yeah, and I laughed, and she showed me this article she was reading, and it listed sort of the top 10 symptoms of ADHD, and I had them all.
Okay.
And I had
And that
never.
prompted your
Yeah,
diagnosis.
exactly. And I had never thought that I thought all these things were separate problems. I never knew that they were
Yeah.
could all be connected to one label, and that possibly there was some treatment that could alleviate some of that. And sure enough, the medication was. So I've been on the medication for 5 years now, and it was a godsend. I Most of those symptoms were erased within 3 weeks.
Wow.
I no longer had anxiety. I no longer had OCD, compulsive thinking. I no longer had a distracted brain with 20 thoughts going through. I could suddenly carry on conversations. I was crying at movies, which I had never done in my life.
Okay.
Empathy was something I was learning about. And
Yeah.
so I truly, felt like I was reborn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad you found that path and your wife triggered that search and the medications were have positively impact. I often see that parents or adults that get a late diagnosis sometimes because I work with children. I find that once a child gets diagnosed, it sometimes prompts the parent at a later stage to pursue a diagnosis. They
Sure.
go like, "Oh, these questions that you're asking me about my kid, they also apply to me," and then that.
Yeah.
And I often see that in retrospect, they can link it back to a lot of childhood memories, and they kind of go like, "Well, I wish I knew that. I wish I started earlier." And so I'm glad that moving forward, you're able to find the right strategies that would help.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that kind of gave us that platform of Behaviour Speak, and that, allowed you to have all the conversations and these questions and these very interesting episodes that you got out for us.
Yeah.
So looking back kind of on all of these different conversations that you've had, you were saying that there are some things that surprised you, right? Some things that kind of stood out. Was there, I want to ask the opposite now. Was there kind of like a recurring theme that kept coming up regardless of all of the different, global perspectives that you were getting? Was there one common thing, one or more common themes that kept resurfacing again and again?
Hey, everybody. If you're a BCBA or master's level behavior analyst thinking about doctoral training, here's a quick heads up. The application deadline has been extended for the Doctor of Education in the field of Applied Behavior Analysis at Western University's Faculty of Education. You now have until April 12th, 2026 to apply for fall intake. This fully online 3-year cohort program is designed for working professionals with potential for a BCBAD pathway with a qualifying dissertation in practice. If you're ready to step into leadership, academia, consulting, or policy, check the links in the show notes to learn more and apply, or email edrecruit@uwo.ca with questions. Well, I think I kind of didn't really answer your question about what stood out either. I just kind of told you what led to it. I can tell you, I'll tell you what stood out, and I'll answer that question too. Like what stood out for me at that once sort of that all happened and the pandemic hit and a lot of these big, the murder of George Floyd in 2020, the uncovering of the child graves at the residential schools in 2021. These were issues in the world that I had let slide by and stayed quite willfully ignorant to for my entire life. And suddenly I'm now have this whole new level of focus and mental clarity
To explore them.
to explore them and start, and to be somewhat shocked by them, which is, embarrassing in hindsight. And it really just opened up this whole world that I had been ignoring and harms I'd been inadvertently causing and friends whose plights I'd been ignoring and so on, that I said, I want to do something different. I had learned about the word anti-racism and understood that the term meant, there was no such thing as being racist or not racist. You're either racist or anti-racist. And being anti-racist meant you were doing something actively.
Yeah.
And so that meant I had to do something actively for the rest of my life. And so I think that was really, and starting to learn about, discomfort and privilege and colonization and all these sorts of aspects. These were the things that I just wasn't aware of and didn't understand, and thought, okay, the podcast is going to be a good tool for me to learn about those things. And I would guess there's probably a lot of other folks out there
And others, of course,
that want to learn these things. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. And so in terms of kind of the opposite themes of, that are kind of common across contexts, there's a couple things. So I'm one of my missions is to interview a behavior analyst in every country in the world.
Yeah. How close are we to that?
Oh, well, I think I need to look up how many countries in the world there are.
Okay.
But I know that I think so far I've covered close to 50 countries. I think I've got about 25 or 30 scheduled for this year. Not to mention kind of Indigenous First Nations, which I think, obviously brings up a whole other theme and conversation, and 35, 40 of those. There's been a lot, and so it's been interesting. But certainly look at the countries outside of the geographic areas of North America, the UK and even Australia.
Right.
There's been some themes I've noticed in these other countries that have been common. I think first off, how most of these countries, except for sort of a few sort of isolated places here and there, I think some of the wealthier nations, there are very few of us. If not none of us. Some of these countries have no behavior analysts at all. that was really interesting to me, and a common theme I was discovering more and more as I started interviewing more and more of these folks in these countries. The story was the same over and over again. I'm the first one. There's
Yeah.
just two of us. We've been doing this for 5 years, and so where
The struggle to kind of reach the more remote areas that are not very central to these countries, the struggle
hmm
to build a network of ABA professionals. And
hmm Yeah. Well, certainly looking at even in those countries, certainly those two behavior analysts are only in that major city of 10 million.
exactly.
Um, uh, Although an interesting surprise, early on, an early interview I did, it was in the episode 30, I believe it was, with Rocio Rosales. She's a behavior analyst in Massachusetts, which in the States, which apparently is one of the most densely populated in terms of behavior analysts.
Okay.
Even in that small state, which is a very small area, like tiny, the rural areas of that state are lacking in behavior analysts. And so this sort of rural issue is also interestingly common kind of around the world, which was fascinating. But so one thing was sort of the very few behavior analysts around the world. The other common theme I'm finding is this barrier around the in terms of kind of the anti-ABA conversation.
Okay. That's
Uh,
another common theme that kept
yeah,
research.
even in these countries with one behavior analyst, they're running into this barrier, which is making it even more difficult because they can't even get the field started because governments are sort of on board with this rhetoric, and so it's really made it difficult for the field to expand, which has been really huge. One last theme that I want to point out, which has been really also really fascinating, is something I kind of dubbed the RBT problem.
Okay.
Um, um, what I'm noticing in a lot of these countries where behavior analysis is just developing, and there may be one or two certified behavior analysts, a lot of these countries have multiple hundreds, sometimes thousands of individuals that have taken a 40-hour RBT course or
Yeah.
IBT course or something like that. And they're using that course to offer behavior analytic services to families with
Mm.
no supervision, no training,
Misrepresentation of, yeah.
misrepresentation. And registered behavior technician sounds like a good name to someone who has no
Yeah.
context. And
Yeah.
a lot of these, behavior analysts, I remember talking to Alia Yasir in Pakistan, and she talked about, and she talked about how there's just so many of these IBTs and RBTs in Pakistan and India that are out there working without supervision. And so they're kind of frantically trying to build capacity and create more IBAs and create this sort of neat understanding and that supervision is required. And it's a real barrier for it's become a real problem in a lot of these countries because we're now perpetuating that sort of conversation that sort of against ABA, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It feeds into that narrative of those that don't want to support ABA. They tend to
hmm
use these cases where ABA has been misrepresented by
Yeah.
people who are unqualified. And we can also look at this as kind of like which has happened with the new reforms that happened with the boards, but we can
Mm,
also look at this as a structural issue. Why have all of these people found it very hard to seek out supervision? And what
yeah.
can we do to improve that type of supervision and education, theory, examination, licensing structure
Mm,
to make it easier, to make it more accessible to those that really, because we know that the need is there, and there's a gap in the professionals, and that
mm,
that gap is kind of causing all of these issues, which then feeds into the rhetoric of, well, ABA is not for us,
mm,
which feeds into we don't have enough licensed professionals, and we keep going. We're kind of stuck in that
yeah.
circle. And
Yeah.
going back to kind of what you said about it, I also see it as a global issue that there's always remote areas that are lacking. And I'm always wondering, because I've lived and worked in Lebanon and in the UAE, where I would consider myself, to be well supported in the professional realm, right? We have enough, at least in Lebanon, and we have plenty in the UAE. But um, I'm always wondering how we can bring in from, let's say, resource-rich countries, right? The countries where you find a lot of the research coming out of, how we can bring these resources and kind of benefit everyone, right? Because looking into nuances and best practice of ABA, for example, is not only going to work for countries where the services are lacking, it's also going to work for, I don't know, more resource-rich countries that also have trouble getting ABA access to remote areas, right? So I think the conversations that you're starting are important because it kind of helps us see that we're all in this together. And there's no such thing as our struggles and your struggles. And, if one of us somewhere around the world is able to find a strategy that works, a nuance that can be looked at, then everyone can benefit from it because all of these struggles are kind of global. And this is, I think, one of the big benefits of having a platform that brings multiple perspectives to the conversation. Right, a lot of things get lost in translation, whether it's a language barrier, whether it's a research barrier, whether it's a cultural barrier, and having a bridge to that to say, hey, listen, somewhere around the world, halfway across the world in a different time zone, right? Someone had a very similar struggle. They used the strategy. It worked, right? This is how they were able to train the parents. This is how they were able to advocate for it. This is, now you can use it here, and then everyone. So it's just that link, that bridge, I think, is very important. I can definitely see how sometimes it can push us outside our comfort zone, having these conversations. Did you find any struggles with, I know you struggled to find contacts in different countries. I'm sure that wasn't easy. But other than that, was there some kind of uncomfortable situation, or what were the major struggles of being able to connect with so many people? I remember you started off by saying that you did not have a lot of opportunities for networking, and here you are networking globally. So how was that jump for you personally?
Yeah. I think the jump was easier than I thought it was. Getting guests, I thought, would be the most difficult part of this whole thing. Um, it's really just about. It was a lot of cold calls, right? Just a lot of
Sure.
emails out to folks. Trying to sort of frame emails, thinking about the language I was using in the emails, and I think it's much like even just reaching out to, you know, we're often trying to encourage our students when they're trying to get them to make contact with literature, to reach out to the authors of papers, and just reach out to the author. They'll send you the paper. They'll talk to you about the paper, and people are surprised how generous, I think, behavior analysts can be with their time and knowledge, because they know it's difficult to disseminate our work out there, and any opportunity they can have, they'll take. And so that surprised me kind of early on, how willing folks were to have these conversations. I think what became more difficult was, now that I've got these people willing to have a conversation, now I have to figure out something to talk about, and come up with questions, and that was hard at first. But I realized, I started to realize, like, over time, that, the basic questions that I was asking, that I thought maybe were silly, or stupid, or whatever, were questions everyone wanted answers to. Yeah.
Did you have a common structure, common questions that you asked everyone across all episodes, or did it vary according to the conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think early on, I really put it back on the guests. I said, I want to talk about I had a sort of patent line of, I want to talk about whatever you're most passionate about, because I know that'll make for the best conversation. And most of the time that led to really rich discussions because, they were really into these sorts of areas. When I got into sort of some of these international interviews, then it became a little more difficult because, you know, these folks were were they didn't have things. I mean, they were just passionate about growing the field in their country, and so the questions started to become quite similar. And I think for going from sort of Slovenia to Somalia to Sudan, um, the questions weren't much different. Tell me about ABA. How many of you are there? What's the history? Um, what do autism services look like? How do folks access diagnoses? What were services like before ABA? What are they like now? What's funding like? It's pretty much the same kind of questions, and often it's a similar conversation, which I think may surprise someone listening in Sudan versus someone listening in Poland, or someone listening in Botswana. That they're all running into sort of these kind of similar issues, which I think
What
in
a
some ways
realization. Yeah,
connects people. Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
100%. Um, okay. Um, I think everyone has a lot to learn from listening into these conversations, especially if we're able to kind of point out the different answers that people gave to similar questions. I think early career practitioners, especially those that are just getting into the field, that are trying to build their perspective of ABA, that are trying to find their place, I think would benefit a lot from listening to these conversations. What do you wish that these early career professionals, or someone that's just getting to know about ABA, or just starting to, practice in the field, now that you've had all of these very rich, culturally aware conversations, what do you wish they understood sooner about behavior analysis, beyond what we would find in your journals and in the textbooks and in, you know, um, what we've
yeah,
all studied to pass the exam? Beyond that, what do you think, what would you add to the training from all
yeah.
of these conversations?
I mean, I think some of the things are starting to be added now, which is really nice to see.
Yes. Yes. Yes,
I think if
definitely.
you'd asked me this question a few years ago, certainly, cultural responsiveness, culturally responsive
Yes.
care would have been something I would have pushed forward, and really understanding that, and I really like how like I think Jimenez Gomez and others with their culture responsive assessments, and that some of these conversations aren't necessarily. I think people used to think it was a very sort of woke sort of
Mm.
which I don't have a problem with, but it used to focus on sort of these really, I think, um, like you'd have to talk about race, think about racism, and think about sexism, and think about ableism, which we need to think about all those things, but it's actually quite simple. Culture responsive care is just about asking folks questions about their lives, and not and checking your own biases, and
Humility.
self-reflecting, and being non-judgmental, and humble, like 100%. And then all those things should just kind of come into play. It's not necessarily, outing yourself as, a bad person, or, I mean, I certainly have come to think of, the word racism to have a completely different meaning than I used to think it had when I kind of first got into this. I used to think it was just about, you know, um, um, really sort of overt aggressive behaviors, that we're all familiar with. But I think in some ways, you know, um, you know, I'm always finding bias that I have, and I'm something that I've really, one lesson that I've really learned over the years from having these conversations is this act of self reflection.
Yeah.
I'm reflecting on the last question you just asked.
Yeah.
I'll be reflecting on this conversation when we're done,
Or
and
reflecting on things that you learned that you took for granted, right?
mm,
How sometimes our textbooks and our research
yeah,
can inadvertently carry ideas that don't necessarily apply to our culture, but we
hmm
just take it for granted that this is how things should be done. And I think these are very important self-reflections, or maybe group reflections to be done, right? Often engaging with colleagues in these conversations of, hey, what do you think of one that recently came up for us was, I'm not sure how I quite feel about the idea of a window of tolerance. And this is something that we often teach a lot. Window of tolerance, and having to work on expanding your window of tolerance when working with young kids. And, the stronger your window, the wider your window of tolerance is, the better you are. So that didn't sit too well with me. So we just engaged in a conversation, and we were talking about, well, what are our alternatives? What else do we want to teach? We kind of took it for granted that this is what the research says. This is what these pioneers in the field have said we should teach, and we come and we apply it on our culture and in our countries and in our language, and we translate it word for word. But then having that, that ability to say, well, wait, does that sit well? Very important conversations and reflections to be had. Thank you for bringing that up.
Something that to kind of go back to your question around something that around what I think early career practitioners or students need to learn about. One thing I used to take for granted, and I'm now really intentional and thoughtful and so grateful for, is that I have this opportunity in my job to be a supervisor and a
Yeah.
mentor for folks trying to get their BCBA certifications. And I think about the things that I didn't learn, that I can kind of pass on to these folks. And early on, I didn't even realize that. I didn't even think I had things to pass on to these folks until I started realizing how much they didn't know, when I would sort of talk about things that I thought everybody knew. And as those conversations went on, some of the things we've been really focusing on now in supervision are behavior analysis is a really kind of precise and technological and procedural and intentional, and we task analyze everything and are very thoughtful about every step we take, and this is all amazing, excellent. This is sort of the heart of our science that sort of makes it differ from sort of other areas, and why behavior analysis can be something, that's really complementary to any other field. And I think you could be an engineer and a behavior analyst, you could be a doctor and a behavior analyst, you
Yeah.
could be a soccer coach and a behavior analyst. It doesn't matter. And the behavior analysis will just make everything better
Decipher behavior. Yeah.
in a lot of ways. However, I think, and I've struggled to articulate this, and I'll continue to struggle right now, is that people aren't precise, and people aren't technological and procedural and step by step. And I think we're starting to understand this a little more. I think certainly with sort of the resurgence of ACT and acceptance commitment therapy and the acceptance commitment training into the sort of behavior analysis scope of confidence, we're starting to see that it's easy enough to write a precise behavior program, behavior plan, and assessment report, and say this is what needs to happen. It's a whole other conversation when when you want to get a single mom, with 7 jobs and who's also neurodivergent herself
Yeah.
and stressed and burnt out and exhausted and in pain to implement these precise technological procedures. It's not that simple, and I think something that's really missing from our training is how to work with people how to have these conversations. I've really gotten excited about, and I think any of the psychologists listening will certainly be familiar with this, but I've really gotten excited about motivational interviewing.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
I think it's the missing link, certainly. And in the work we do, we don't work in this RBT context. When you have RBTs to do your job, it's different. The RBTs will do their job, and certainly there's a whole thing there. But when you're just in parent coaching and staff training and sort of that realm, and working with folks that don't have an ABA background, it's a whole other world. And motivational interviewing is beautiful.
Beautiful. Another word that motivational interviewing used to be called before that term was coined, I believe, was behavioral artistry. And that really spoke to me, because really motivational interviewing is an art. The way you speak to people, the way you kind of work around their needs, work around their culture, work around their traumas, work around their beliefs and their is an art. It's not as scientific as we're used to as behavior analysts. And
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, it originated in helping patients adhere to certain medical medications and certain medical routines, right? They weren't. And then we would send them home with these prescriptions, and they would come back not having done any of them. And this is where motivational interviewing started. And I think it's so beautiful. And it speaks to ABA as well, how we can take it and turn it into something that we can use in our field. It's the same what other people are doing with ABA at the end of the day. But yes, it's a
And it's very technical as well and intentional. And
yes.
I think we miss that in our interactions, that the verbal behavior, of our clients and of ourselves needs to be equally precise and intentional and thought of. And as I learn more and more about MI and listen to different podcasts and webinars, and I just interviewed Dr. Monica Gilbert, who's a big
Yeah,
motivational
great.
interview. She's got a lovely. I highly encourage folks to check out her MI for Change podcast.
Yes.
20-minute tidbits on
And her course on MI has been
absolutely
yeah.
is amazing. Is this idea that when you're speaking with a client or a family or whomever, everything you say needs to be thoughtful and intentional and reflected on. Am I saying this for a reason beyond my own benefit? Will what I say lead to progress in the conversation or pull this conversation back? And we don't learn any of those skills,
Not enough.
and certainly not in my my graduate program. I think we're starting to see this more now in some of the programs, again with some of the ACT and whatnot built in. But I certainly didn't learn any of these skills. Yeah. The other area that I think is something that, and this is motivational interviewing has been around for 40 years. Something like 2,400 clinical trials are showing its effectiveness.
Yeah.
So it's a grounded, certainly evidence-based procedure that has a lot of merit. Another area that's been around for almost 50 years, but we're not seeing much in our field until now, is the constructional approach and the constructional behavior analysis area that we're seeing, sort of Israel Gold Diamond, TV Joe Lang, Jesus Rosales Ruiz, Paul Andronis. These folks have really kind of pioneered this stuff and are now bringing it forward. This stuff is just blowing my mind.
Tell me more. I'm not quite familiar with it. Can you tell me more about what that is?
And I'm starting a whole podcast series on it. The first episode came out this past Friday with Awab Abdul Jalil, and I'm going to do an episode every month. And essentially, what was the phrase? Awab used. It's I think the line is, the constructional approach is, what is the behavior, the absence of which is the problem, is the phrase. And so the idea is of looking at a context and going, you have an individual engaging in a behavior of concern, challenging behavior, problem behavior, whatever term you'd like to label it. I check out the constructionalapproach.com. I think a textbook out that came out in 2022. They've got a new book coming out this summer. But very simply, it is looking at sort of, if we look at sort of a typical behavior intervention plan or positive behavior support plan, you'll have some sort of behavior that challenges. You'll have some setting event antecedent type strategies in place.
Yeah.
You'll have some consequence reinforcement based strategies in place, and you'll have typically some sort of replacement behavior, some functionally equivalent behavior that we're going to teach to replace the challenging behavior. And so take the hypothetical of the individual that doesn't want to do a math worksheet, is presented a math worksheet, engages in property destruction, escapes doing the math worksheet. And so the typical replacement behavior is asking for a break from doing math, a break card, using their words to say, I need a break.
Okay.
I need a minute, that kind of thing. And they get a functionally equivalent escape maintain behavior that is a lot less damaging than property destruction, aggression, self-injury, and whatnot. And all in all, the constructional approach doesn't suggest you change that model. I mean, certainly in the beginnings, that can it's about keep people safe, and that's a great strategy. The constructional approach basically says, okay, let's use that sort of negative reinforcement contingency and say, let's use the contingencies that are already in place to shape new repertoires that now make the situation they were trying to escape less aversive. So how can we make the math worksheet something they don't want to escape?
Okay.
Right? And how can we do that? Yeah. Environmental skill building. And how can we do that without necessarily, and I'm butchering this. Listen to the episode with Awab, episode 250. Basically, there's this thing called this concept of the constructional interview, where we ask what's sort of the terminal repertoire we want to achieve, what skills does the individual have now, and how can we shape those skills into new repertoires that help them access reinforcement that's already in the environment. There was there were some amazing case studies. So the Endicott College put on a constructional conference. They put them on for free last year and this year. Some amazing stuff coming out of there. And watch for these episodes. I've got Danielle Cohen coming on. She's a first year doctoral student at Endicott. There's this intervention called constructional exposure therapy, and basically it's using a lot of ascent-based practices, compassion-based practices. They're essentially building ascent into these into exposure therapy. And so what she did, she had this 9-year-old boy, deathly afraid of nail clippers, autistic boy. His mother had to clip his nails while he was sleeping for his entire life, toenails and fingernails. Using this constructional exposure therapy approach, within 45 minutes or an hour, this kid was clipping his own nails.
Okay.
Within 2 hours, he was getting his nails clipped by the interventionist. Within 2 hours, was clipping his own nails.
That was based on a skill that he had learned in the background, or
basically they were using this sort of so with constructional exposure therapy, and this is why I'm making it worse and worse as I tell it. And if you ask me this question 10 interviews down the road, it'll be a whole lot better. They're using this negative reinforcement contingency as the reinforcer to shape positive behaviors. So the idea that if the function is escape, let's use that function to shape them towards positive behavior. And so with typical exposure therapy, you might approach with nail clippers. You might start by showing them the nail clippers, and if they accept it, you might give them a high five or give them a reward. Then you'll get them closer and closer and closer. You'll keep praising them. You'll keep pushing through. Keep praising them.
Yeah.
With constructional exposure therapy, after every step of that sort of desensitization procedure, the reinforcer is escape every time. So I show you the nail clippers, I leave the room for 5 minutes.
Okay.
I come a little closer, I leave the room for 5 minutes. I touch it to your fingernails, I leave the room for 5 minutes. I clip one nail, I leave the room for 5 minutes. Every time they're getting that opportunity to escape. And every time during the procedure that they say, I don't want to do this, they engage in minor level problem behavior, it's also removed. Through those procedures, they're getting kids to accept blood draws, EEG procedures.
I can see the control factor here also, kids feeling like they are in charge of this process versus feeling like they're not, especially because there's fears are often at the base of this. And this trauma-informed approach also feeds well into this narrative of assent-based instruction. Beautiful.
And these guys, Joe Lang, Adranis, others, Jesus, have been doing these procedures for decades and decades and decades. Working with, they're working with so many individuals with so many different sort of these sort of mental disorders, schizophrenia, depression, personality disorders, and having just beautiful, lovely results. It's complex. But it's elegant and simple at the same time, and it's another area
ethical,
that
I would
and
say.
so ethical. Yeah, it's just really, really lovely. And so I think these are two areas that I would love to see early practitioners dive into, ask questions about, spend time learning about, take electives if they're in their graduate programs in these other sort of and whatnot. And I think that would really be awesome.
I'm happy to see the ABA curriculum become more inclusive of these topics now and making it a CU requirement. The cultural competence become a CU requirement. And, there's a lot more conversations on consent versus assent and this trauma-informed care. And I'm happy to see a lot of preventative ABA preventative strategies being taught, which also speaks to what you were saying. Why are we kind of waiting for the problem behavior? If we're already familiar with the functions, right? Why are we waiting for the problem behavior to emerge and serve that function? Why don't we teach preventative? What are the big four, as Elia Rosales has called them, and how can we teach them as early on as possible? So these are very important conversations. I personally will look more into what is it?
Constructional.
Constructional approaches and learn more.
Awesome.
What's next for Behaviour Speak? I know you still have probably some places around the world that you need to cover to kind of get your full list.
That's right.
But what's next? Are there any next steps that we should be looking forward to? Are there conversations that you're looking forward to? Are there conversations that you wish you can go back and repeat now that you've learned more? So what's next?
Absolutely. There's a lot of conversations I'd love to go back and repeat, not only because I've learned more, but also because my equipment has improved, and I'd love to get more video recordings of some of these past guests that were only audio, and be able to kind of show that off some more. And I'm actually starting to reach out now to really early guests and kind of bring them back for repeat conversations. So that's been exciting. Some of the fun things that I kind of have coming up. I've already started. I've started a new series. I've released 2 episodes so far, where. So it started with I reached out to a behavior analyst in Uruguay in South America and asked them to come on the podcast and Uruguay and Colombia. Yeah, and I think it started with Colombia. And they were excited. Yeah, they wanted to come on the podcast, but they asked if we could not do it in English.
Oh.
And I said, "Oh, well,
What
that may be
technology would I need to make that happen?
how do I do that? How do I pull that off?" And I think there is certainly some technology available to do those sorts of things, and I can, AI translate, all those sorts of things are available. Bring on an interpreter or whatnot. But I started thinking, maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way, and maybe I'm missing out on an audience that that doesn't speak English.
Yeah.
I started thinking, and so I've started a new series where I'm bringing on guest hosts to interview these guests in their native languages. And so we've done Colombia, we've done Argentina, we've done Kazakhstan.
Does that look like live translation or?
So that's been interesting. I haven't really mastered that yet, but basically it's so you might interview a guest in Arabic and have a conversation about kind of whatever you want to talk about, and then it gets a little dicey. I ideally I would have English subtitles.
Okay.
And I've tried that a bit. I tried that with the Colombia episode, and it was difficult to do. Really, I think the only way without sort of paying out of pocket for, because there are some AI applications out there that I think can do it. It's difficult because I think it's difficult for sort of the applications to pick up accents and whatnot and translate properly. And so what I need for those to work is I need the guests to then translate the language themselves, and so we can kind of put that in. But I'm still working on that, so I haven't really figured that out yet.
But what amazing conversations would come out if, I think, even if English language speakers were able to speak in their native language, I even think that conversation would be different and might be culturally richer. So I think that's a wonderful next step for the podcast to bring in different languages into the mix, which can often be a barrier, I think.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you wanted to be on the podcast and can't speak English, reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. Now's your chance.
Yeah. Yes. So that's one thing, and then I think the other thing is just. I really don't know what the sky's the limit. I'm just so grateful that I'm able to talk to so many amazing, brilliant people from so many different aspects. I'm and I think I've started to I think after interviewing 300 people or so, I'm starting to get a bit of credibility and a bit of I think I hope I'm starting to get a reputation that I'm creating a safe space for folks, and it has opened up the doors for folks who I never thought would come on the podcast to come on, and so I'm excited about some of the people coming up this year, but I'm excited about some of the people that I'll be getting in 5 more years. Yeah.
I'm excited about as well. I really like the idea of having multiple hosts or kind of bringing in an additional voice to the conversation. I've always found that a host kind of managing type of a debate topic is something that we're always open to hearing, because there are debatable issues and where there's no right and wrong. It's kind of a gray area, but again, the multiple perspectives on these gray area topics would be very interesting and not always easy to navigate as a conversation. Right? It can very quickly derail, but if kept within its limits can be very beneficial to widening one's understanding of the field and of the practice, which I think was what Behaviour Speak does beautifully. It widens our understanding. It widens our knowledge about the field beyond whatever borders we're sitting inside of.
Yeah.
What are some final messages that you feel we didn't bring up in our conversation that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think one thing that has, I think one of the greatest rewards from doing this. Certainly, I love all the feedback. I love being able to, uplift voices that may not have a space somewhere else. But something that I didn't sort of expect, and you alluded to it a bit earlier when we were sort of talking about people from one country listening about efforts in another country, is that even with this day of internet and connection and social media and so many opportunities to connect with people all over the world, I've had so many folks tell me they found each other via this podcast.
Yeah.
They found someone like them that they didn't know existed. And that's been incredibly humbling and an incredible honor to sort of create connections and
Even the
link
internet can be
people.
an echo chamber of some sort and kind
Yeah.
of limit you in what you can find. I agree with what they've said. Yeah.
I think I continue to sort of pitch myself that I'm able to do this. It's really become a passion project for me. I hope to do this for, the rest of my life. I'm just so grateful for all the folks that have come on. I'm grateful for you, Asmahan. I mean, your conversation was a real highlight for me, and I learned so much. We actually we dig into, for folks wondering about the Big Four, we dig into that in our conversation there, and a lot of really kind of cool things, and just to have an hour and a half with so many incredible individuals, some who have done amazing things for years, some who are going to do amazing things, is really humbling and a real honor.
Yeah. Well, I'm the one who is honored to get the chance to be part of this conversation, to get a chance to ask you these questions even today. I really look forward to every episode and the diversity of topics and perspectives that it brings. As culturally aware as I think I am, I'm constantly humbled by how I'm not. And I think this is something that it's a goal I would never have, right? To kind of know everything about everyone. And I'll always kind of approach it with every family, even if they come from the same neighborhood, right? We always need to ask the right questions and approach this sensitively. So thank you for bringing that awareness to everyone and to all the listeners. And I hope even late career practitioners, just as much as early career practitioners, get to listen to these conversations. And there's a lot to add. There's a lot of benefit to it. So I'm looking forward to the next steps of Behaviour Speak as well.
Thanks, Asmahan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, April 1st marks the start of MENA Heritage Month, and you can earn free CEUs across all behavior analysis credentials for these 8 conversations with Southwest Asian and Northern African guests I interviewed in 2025. Episode 243, Culturally Responsive Behavior Analysis in the United Arab Emirates with Amina Maliki. Episode 240, Voices from Gaza, Understanding War Trauma with Dr. Iman Farajala. Episode 238, Behavior Analysis in Bahrain with Ingi Ali Reza. Episode 232, Behavior Analysis in Sudan with Salma Abdel Rahman Abdallah. Episode 228, The Nubian Egyptian Behavior Analyst with Nihal Sayam. Episode 218, Behavior Analysis in Morocco with Mina El Khali. Episode 215, Behavior Analysis in Turkey with Dr. Buket Kisak Demiroglu. And of course, episode 200, Safeguarding Vulnerable Children in the Arab World with Dr. Asmahan Saleh Khalil. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and subscribe to our YouTube page at Behaviour Speak. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.